talking about transitions into a fulfilling adult life. We are going to record the webinar. If you'd rather have your camera turned off, that's fine. And do please keep your mics on mute, unless you're a speaker, obviously, because we'll need to hear from you. We'll be spotlighting speakers, as I think I am just now, so you'll get to see the person that you are hearing as you see their slides as well. Our agenda looks really exciting for this morning. We've got various people telling us all about things around that theme of transitions to a fulfilling adult life. Emma, who's here from Middlesbrough, will be presenting on some work around supporting young people with SEND into training and employment. We are going to hear from some experts about experience and young people and what makes a good transition. At that point, we won't be recording, so we'll stop recording and then restart. But you will see their slides afterwards. We'll also have a break, a bit of a comfort break, because it's a long time on screen. So that will come after we've heard from Yasmina and Grace, and then our colleague at CDC, James, will talk you through a recent piece of work from the social care team. And then Linda Jordan, who is a long-time colleague of CDC, she works at NDTI, will also talk us through some of their recent work and remind us of those lovely preparing for adulthood outcomes that I think, amid a lot of change currently around SEND, I think the PFA outcomes are a really good place to ground ourselves in terms of what a good life looks like for us all, but especially for children and people with special educational needs and those who are disabled, and a really good place to start at what we all want to be doing for those young people. We will wrap up by 12:15, and as I said, there'll be a break, so you will have a chance to have some time off your screen as well. If you would like to put in the chat who you are and where you're from, feel very free to do that. You've got various people from CDC on the call who've put today together, and Johanna, Macy, Sam. We are all very grateful to all of your very excellent organisational skills and getting us here. And nice to see some people putting their names in the chat. So do use the chat as you wish. So housekeeping on the slide, I've already said this, but do please keep yourself on mute unless you're a speaker. Very important that you're not on mute if you're telling us all about your presentation. A Teams top tip, which our team are especially good at because we use it so often. If you're struggling to see slides, then use press Control and scroll your mouse arrow and it will make the content bigger or smaller. Turn on captions, select those 3 dots in the top right corner, and then language and speech, and you can turn on live captions. Hopefully we'll generally get the gist. They're not always the best at getting exactly, but hopefully would cover what we are saying. And there's going to be a short opportunity for question and answer after each of the speakers' sections, and then a longer opportunity for broader reflection at the end. If you want to put a question in the chat as someone speaking, then we've got someone at CDC who'll be monitoring that and it'll be captured, but we'll wait until after the presentation to ask that. We have a couple of recent resources that CDC have put out that we thought it would be good to showcase here. Amid lots of change in the NHS at the moment, we would like to flag our designated clinical officer for SEND handbook, which is something that we've developed over several years. This is the latest iteration, which brings together lots of the recent guidance that NHS England has published around the role and SEND wider. Some really lovely contributions from people who are doing that role, and I'm sure some of you will be on the call today. So that's something that we'd like you to have a look at. Not just if you're a DCO, obviously as a DCO it's very very important, but for anyone in the system, understanding what that critical role does and how you might be able to draw on their expertise in your role. That would be a good place to start. So thanks everyone that helped us to develop that. We also, so the RISE programme, which is the contract funded by DFE that allows us to put this webinar on today, there's another half of that contract, which is around developing primary research into the system around SEND. Lots of really exciting things happening there this year. We also have an effective practice hub, so case studies that are done kind of very in depth. So there is a real sense of impact over a period of time on an innovation, and the latest one is around a nursery inclusion project. So that is the link there on the slide, a Wandsworth project, but loads and loads of really interesting case studies in there that I think if you're feeling that you need a bit of a boost around what does work in SEND when everyone is talking about SEND being a system that is not working very well right now, that's a nice place to start. So do have a look, please. Now, before we get on to the very exciting business of the morning and hearing from the people that we've put on the agenda, we do just want to get a chance for you to tell us how this is feeling. So we have a Menti poll. You can go to Menti, the web address on the slide there, and type in that code, or use the QR code, and that'll take you to the questions that we want to ask. And I did just see someone ask in the chat if we'll be sharing the slides. Sam's just come in and said yes, we will. So you will get the slides as well as the link to the recording if you want to hear anything again. But yeah, please do go to the Menti. There are 2 questions. The first one being, how confident do you feel in your role or in the knowledge that you have around supporting effective transitions to a fulfilling adult life? So we'll take a bit of a temperature check there. Jo will share that those results just now. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how confident are we feeling in our role or in the knowledge that we have supporting transitions to a fulfilling adult life? Good, kind of middling in there. No one at 1, which is nice, and I would expect that given that you've come to this session. I feel like you're probably all very interested in working in this space already. But nice to just get a sense of how confident and knowledgeable you're feeling in that space. And hopefully by the end of a couple of hours with us this morning, you'll be feeling like you've got some new knowledge or a bit of inspiration, something that will spark a bit of a confidence boost even. So we're going to come back to that question later. The next question is us asking what you're hoping to get out of this morning. So I think you should have the opportunity to put in a few words here, and it will come up as a nice word cloud for us to understand a bit about what brought you here, what you're looking for. And if you're still joining us, then you're very welcome, and thank you for popping your name in the chat. Tools, ideas, up-to-date knowledge, and detailed strategies. And we will certainly do our best where there are things that you're asking for that we know exist. We'll put links to things in the chat or send them by email afterwards, because there is a lot in this space, isn't there? Sharing ideas, greater knowledge, inspiration. And I think we have, it's a funny word, inspiration, but I think what we will definitely get from our experts by experience today is a bit of an insight into their lives and what they think would make moving into adulthood work better, improve that process for them. So I think I always feel very confident when we have young people on our agenda that we're going to get something that is just really good, really grounded, really, really helpful. Okay, that looks like a really nice selection of things that I'm confident that we'll be able to give you today. We are going to share that full slide deck. We've said that, and as I said, someone's going to be monitoring the chat. So if you want to put a question in while you're listening to a presentation, that's fine, and we'll make sure we come back to that. But there'll also be a chance for you to just put your hand up and ask that question as well. So I am going to go to the first presentation on our agenda, which is from Emma Cowley in Middlesbrough. I'll let Emma introduce herself properly, but the theme of this presentation is around supporting young people with SEND into training and employment in Middlesbrough, learning from what you've done there. Welcome, Emma. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks for that introduction. Morning, everyone. I'm Emma Cowley. I'm the Interim Strategic Lead for Inclusion Services at Middlesbrough. And we had the privilege recently of working to develop this as a case study for the What Works in SEND Hub. So I know, Anna, you plugged that a moment ago, but I'll plug it again because there are some fantastic resources on there. And I have put a link as well in the slide deck to the full case study for this particular presentation, so that if people do want to go and read that at a point in their own time, then they are more than welcome and encouraged to do so. Can I ask for the next slide, please? Thank you. So I wanted to start this morning by just really defining the challenge that we had in Middlesbrough, which I'm hoping will resonate with many of you. And we really undertook to tackle some of the barriers for employment outcomes for young people with SEND in Middlesbrough in and around 2018. And what we were seeing is, despite the new code of practice coming in and the kind of vision around preparation for adulthood being quite clear, we were still not able to support young people into those outcomes successfully and effectively. And we wanted to understand why. We wanted to be able to push forward with a strategy and vision to overcome some of that. And we knew that at that point, there were too many barriers for children and young people in terms of gaining employment. There wasn't enough coordinated working to support employment outcomes. There was no system that allowed children and young people to progress effectively towards employment outcomes consistently. And we were lacking a real resource in terms of leading change in Middlesbrough. And we were concerned through some of the conversations that we were having that there was a culture around low aspirations for children and young people with SEND. And we wanted to redefine the narrative around that, really understand it, and work with children and young people to change ultimately what the local area's view around employment outcomes was. So we set about on a challenge and we set about on some work, and I'm going to talk through over the next couple of slides on how we did that. So can I ask for the next slide, please? Thank you. So in terms of a summary of our approach, and I'm going to go through each one in a lot more detail in a moment, our key turning point for us was to invest in a strategic lead role. We knew that these outcomes were not going to happen by accident, and they required significant change. And in order to do that, we needed to invest in somebody who was accountable for improving those outcomes. So we built a role so that we could employ somebody whose responsibility it was to drive forward improvements in this area. And once we had that person in post, our first task was to listen to the voices of children and young people. What we wanted to know was, what were their aspirations, what were their experiences, because ultimately we were in the privileged position of being able to advocate for what they wanted and what they needed. And we knew that to get culture change, understanding that was hugely important for us. So we used that as the kind of centerpiece of this work. And around that, we brought together the right people, the right organisations, stakeholders from quite a wide range of organisations as a partnership. And we worked with them to try and forge a shared set of values and some shared commitments around what would it look like, what would change look like in Middlesbrough, and how were we going to achieve improved employment outcomes by working effectively together. And then as a partnership, we actively sought opportunities for change. So we went out looking for opportunities. We wouldn't listen ultimately when a barrier was put up in front of us. We agreed to persevere, and we pushed forward where we thought there were opportunities that we could do things differently. And we made sure that we measured what we were doing and the impact of the changes. And they're all things that I'm going to take you through in a little bit more detail now. So firstly then, thinking about the voices of children and young people, this was a game changer for us in Middlesbrough, really thinking about how did we work to understand what children and young people wanted. We're really fortunate to have a participation lead who has helped to pull this work together, but also helped us with our methodology around how do we do this effectively, not just to listen to individual children and young people, but to co-produce things, to really understand how we get that whole level system change around lived experiences of our families and children. So we undertook a significant amount of work looking at children and young people's engagement, and we did that around individual children and their voices through things like person-centred planning, vocational profiling, work with our providers, looking at groups of children and young people. But we also did whole level system work. We run annual young people's conferences that are designed and led by young people for young people. But those opportunities gave us a chance as a strategic leadership team to meet with young people, to have those conversations and to listen firsthand at, what were the barriers, what were the challenges, what were people worried about, what did they want from their lives. And there's a lot of power in doing that and being able then to almost follow those young people through their journey to measure the impact and the outcomes and the difference that we've made. And we've continued with a lot of this work to make sure that the direction of our strategic plan remains absolutely focused on what children and young people want. One of the things that they talked to us about was a lot of the concepts around employment are actually quite complicated, and our young people struggled sometimes to understand what did those employment pathways look like, what was a supported internship, what did that mean for them, what would access to work and job coaching look like, what does a vocational profile do, what does that mean, and how would their life change potentially for the better if they were to move towards an employment outcome. So we worked with young people to develop a whole ton of resources, easy read guides, case studies, videos, social media material, and we did that with our partners. So it wasn't just the local authority undertaking this work. As part of a group of partners together, we tried to understand how did we firstly eradicate the communication barrier with children and young people so we could make employment accessible and make internships accessible from that very, very early point when we start planning for what young people's outcomes might look like. What this allowed us to do was identify aspirations. So we were able to then understand what types of roles did children and young people want, what type of support did they feel they needed, and where did they see themselves in the future. And all of that then was used to inform the strategic plan, and that has remained the same. This is a central theme to what we do in Middlesbrough. So around this work with young people, we brought together the right people and organisations. We knew that we couldn't do this on our own as a local authority, and we took a really wide view of this. And we brought together internal and external stakeholders. So they were quite wide ranging in terms of our local FE colleges, special schools, Department for Work and Pensions, the kind of obvious external stakeholders that you would need in this type of partnership work. But internally within our own organisation, we also brought together our regeneration teams, our human resources teams, to try and understand how do we make the change corporately as an organisation to advocate for this and to lead by example in terms of the change that we wanted to see. And with those partners, what we did is we shaped and developed what we wanted the vision to look like. And we built that strategic plan in partnership with those partners with a commitment that they would deliver their elements of this plan. And that included everything, job carving, employer engagement, access to work, vocational profiles. I do remember laughing at one point. I vividly remember having a conversation with a senior leader in a school who made a joke or a little jibe about the fact that it wasn't an action plan, it was a manifesto, because it was so detailed. We wanted to make sure that we'd considered the system and how did we engineer in opportunities for employment at every single point. So that meant things like reviewing our processes, our policies, how did we put preparation for adulthood and employment outcomes central to the planning really for children and young people. And what that did is it was slow, it was difficult, there was lots and lots of challenging conversations, it did require a lot of perseverance, but what it allowed us to do was to develop the capacity. It allowed us to start to turn the ship in terms of moving from one thing to this new way of working, and that really encouraged the culture change that we needed. And I'm going to talk to you in a moment about a 50 Futures programme that we've got in Middlesbrough. But one of the kind of key turning points for us was the fact that we used our own organisation, Middlesbrough Council, to try and demonstrate leadership and commitment to the difference that we wanted to see. And again, that encouraged people to come along with us because there was no room then for excuses. If it worked for us, it could work for others. And that really, really helped us to push forward with the plan. So I mentioned earlier about that we actively sought opportunities for change, and one of the things that we were fortunate with in Middlesbrough was our 50 Futures programme. So this programme itself was introduced several years ago. It was probably about 2019, 2020, and it was part of the local authority social regeneration agenda. So the idea was that Middlesbrough is an area with high levels of deprivation, high levels of unemployment, lots and lots of generational unemployment. And we knew that we had members of our communities who were really far from the employment market, but we also knew that we wanted our organisation as a council to reflect the community that we served, and that we had a responsibility corporately and socially to supporting people to upskill, to develop their experience, to allow them to move into the labour market. So we piggybacked onto this. The 50 Futures program itself was about anybody could apply for that. Anybody with any types of experience, any vulnerability, anybody really who was, far away from employment but wanted employment could apply to participate. But we saw a gap, and we knew that we had young people who absolutely would benefit from this program. And what the program allowed was there was 50 placements in departments across the local authority. It was everything from refuse collection to traffic light engineering to architecture to business administration. And what we were able to do was use some of those placements and experiences to provide young people with real life chances to gain experience. And that allowed us to overcome some of the employer engagement barriers that we were experiencing at the time, to allow young people to actually experience work. But it also meant that we were demonstrating leadership and commitment to change. And following on from that, that model has been used in some of our other partners who now open up opportunities across our wider network for young people. So we have our special schools, for example, who work in partnership with each other to offer opportunities for the other special schools. We've got some of our FE colleges who are committed to opening up paid and voluntary experiences within their organisations. So, I'm thinking about one of our biggest FE providers that we've got, Middlesbrough College. They are huge. They have got a huge workforce that deliver everything from, teaching support to IT, to cleaning services, to catering services. So all of those organisations now are really monopolising on this approach to say, well, okay, the labour market is tough, it is hard to get a job. Middlesbrough is an area of deprivation, but what can we be doing as committed partners to try and make the change? And I think one of the things that we've all seen as organisations is we do have a number of roles often that are difficult to recruit to, but we have an untapped, skilled, potential workforce there. And for us being able to demonstrate some of the impact, not just for the young people themselves, but on the organisations, has been really, really important to garner that momentum and to kind of commit people to that cultural change. One of the things that we also did was, if it didn't exist, we commissioned it. So we wanted more internships, we wanted more job coaching, and we worked with our own community learning provision as a local authority where there were gaps. So if we knew that a partner couldn't do it, we used the things that we had influence or control over to be able to fill the gaps ourselves. And that included working with our regeneration colleagues around things like employer engagement, social responsibility and commissioning and contracts, for example. We looked for any possible opportunity that we had to try and gain some engagement and some employment opportunities for young people. And as a partnership, we measured it. So we knew what we were doing. We tracked the things that worked and we scrapped the things that didn't. And where that's allowed us to be at now is in a position where we have got more young people moving into employment outcomes, but we've also been commissioned by the DFE with a grant to run the supported internships pilot programme for young people at Send Support. Just because you have an education, health and care plan doesn't mean that you should be the only children that are able to access this type of experience and support and provision. So we've been really keen to learn from that and that group of young people who are at Send Support level as well. are really helping us to see that these barriers are universal. It's not just about the most complex children. There's a lot of things that we can be doing for young people, with SEND needs at any level to support employment. So there's a lot of learning for us that's come out from that. It's been a really, really rich experience. And I think the other thing that I want to say on this slide before I move to the next is just that a lot of this isn't expensive. It's hard work and it requires perseverance. It is a marathon, not a sprint, but we've not had to spend a lot of money on doing these things. They're cultural changes. It's a shift in the way that we think rather than needing to spend a lot. And for us, that's been the thing that I think has allowed us to make the most progress. So impact, obviously quantitative, everybody wants to know how the numbers are growing. So we have doubled the number of young people with an EHCP and SEND that move into employment each year from when we started the programme to where we are now. And I think I'm going to talk to you in a moment about the impact of that. Yeah, it's great measuring data, it's great measuring performance, but for us, what we're more interested in is what does that mean for the individual young people? What impact and difference does that make for them? We can monitor and track performance scorecards all we want, but we want to hear what their voices are. So on the next slide, I've just popped some testimonials and some words really from young people and their families who've been involved in the work. So we've got one there from a young person who worked with our community learning provider, who secured a job at B&Q. So, as part of the work that we've done internally on building opportunities for young people, we do engage with employers. We have been able to prove it works, and that has slowly grown the number of employers that we have that work with us now, and that employer engagement. When I think back to when we first started and we were getting doors shut in our faces regularly, not because those employers didn't want to work with us. They were overwhelmed with requests from so many different places that they couldn't understand what the impact would be for them and how positive this could be for them. So we've had to demonstrate a lot of that and work hard at doing that, and it is paying dividends now. We've got an example there of a young person who is now in employment with us at Middlesbrough Council as a refuse collector. So an example of where that 50 Futures placement and work with our community learning provider did turn into a paid employment opportunity within the local authority. And then just a testimonial from a parent who I think admittedly was very, very concerned about what this might mean for their child. Very, very worried about the transition from that special school environment into the world of adulthood. It's a huge leap, it's a huge transition, but just a reflection on how much support was put in place for that young person, and ultimately how positive and happy she now is around being able to hold down a job, and how different that has made her life really in terms of achieving a goal for adulthood. So I've popped a link there to the What Works in SEND full case study. There's a lot more detail in there. You can read through that. There's a couple of photos there as well of some of our interns and some of our young people who've gained employment. But I am happy to take any questions at this point as well.
Thank you so much, Emma. And Macy's popped the link to that case study in the chat as well. So do have a look at that after the session. If you have a question, pop your hand up. I've noted a couple that were in the chat already, so Emma, I'll go to those first. And also lots of reaction to the fact that you widened up the opportunity to those whose needs are SEN support, and lots of people saying that felt really positive, and thinking about how much that brought opportunity to a wider group. Are the resources that you mentioned earlier on the slide set available for wider use, please, was one of the questions.
Yes, they are. A lot of them are hosted in our local office, so I am happy to share some of those links for circulation. Yeah,
that would be really helpful. Thanks. If you share those with us, Emma, we'll make sure we send them out with the slides. And the 50 places at the local authority, were those paid?
In the first instance, no, they were work experience and voluntary placements. But what we did with our human resources team is we looked at all of the entry requirements for jobs, our interviewing processes, how did we make adjustments ultimately for, particularly for people that were coming into entry level positions, to remove some of the barriers. So even though the placements themselves weren't paid, there were a number of people who've experienced, those placements that then did go on to gain employment in the local authority. And we supported that by removing the barriers for them as well and making the adjustments that were needed.
Excellent. Thanks, Emma, for answering that one. Okay, Sarah Louise has a hand up and a question. So in you come, Sarah Louise.
Thank you very much. I was just wondering, how much success did you have with finding employment for young people who had highly complex physical needs, such as limb deficiencies or need of powered chairs, and more extreme physical issues rather than cognitive?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. It's a really good question. And I think even though I sit here today and I feel like we have come on in Middlesbrough, we've made a lot of progress, there's still a lot to do. And I think that cohort of children, that type of need that you've described, that is one of the hardest and most challenging barriers that we've got. I think we struggle with adjustments, we struggle with really trying to understand how do we support those young people and break down some of the barriers as well, with employers to doing that. One of the things that we have done, I'm just thinking about a young person, a particular example, was really used access to work and forge links with the Department for Work and Pensions around how do we get the right support packages to be able to make those adjustments. But Sarah, I acknowledge that is something that we need to push forward in Middlesbrough as well. We've not cracked that yet.
I was hoping you had a magic wand. Okay, thanks.
No, but I would share it, I promise, if I did. And if I do, I'll certainly let you know. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think we at CDC, we often hear lots of kind of nuggets of how areas are doing things. So we'll make sure that we keep our ears out for anything that feels like it might go some way to supporting on that. What we will share, we have just done a lot of resourcing around the Equality Act, mainly for schools, but I mean the Equality Act is the Equality Act, and actually I think they're really accessible resources. I think we'll make sure we share those because they are something that you can easily send to employers, to other parts of your system, to help them understand what their duties are there too.
I think, Anna, sorry, just to add, I think one of the things that we have tried to focus on as well, and some of the discussions that we've had, is how do we support sort of self-employment and entrepreneurial type work for that cohort of young people who they may struggle to gain employment in a workplace, or we might struggle with a work experience placement at the moment while we're working through all of those barriers. But that doesn't mean that there's not other experiences that we can be supporting or looking at as well. So I know that in terms of enterprise activities, we have tried to kind of look at all avenues with that. It's not ideal, and acknowledging, like you've said, and you've acknowledged as well, Sarah, that there are significant barriers, but it is something that is allowing experiences to be built, and self-employment is a good option for some young people as well.
Yeah, and I can see Kath. Hello, Kath. Nice to know you're here. Really promoting the benefits of self-employment as well. Just you mentioned access to work, and it might be something that we can take away as something else to think about. But a question from Diane in the chat: how's the access to work working? We find lengthy waiting, which makes it really difficult. Have you had similar experiences, Emma?
Yeah, we have, and we've had to advocate and get involved with some young people. Obviously, the process around access to work is the claim is on the young person themselves. But between ourselves and some of our FE providers, we've been quite active in getting involved in it and not taking no for an answer. We've also fed that back to the Department for Work and Pensions, who've been involved in a lot of our partnership working, so that we've been able to overcome some of those issues, in as best as we can, but it isn't ideal. And I said on one of the slides, we've got creative about how we do things as well. We've had to actively look at sometimes at how we fill those barriers, and then we work around what's possible and what's doable within the system. It's not perfect, but at least it means that the young person isn't prevented from accessing something.
Thank you. Okay, we have a couple of minutes. We could take one last question, either hands up or in the chat, before we move to our next slot. And do have a look in the chat, Emma, when you get a moment, because there's lots of really positive reflections on what you shared. So do read those and feel proud and share with your colleagues locally, because I know it's a big team effort and lots around the kind of culture shift that you've really started, and sounds like you've embedded locally. So that's great.
Thank you.
Okay. I am going to say thank you formally to Emma for coming and sharing, and like I said, the link to your case studies in the chat. Do have a look at that, and thank you. But you sticking around for the rest of the webinar, so you'll be hearing from more, and we'll take some reflections at the very end. So you've not, if you have a reflection or a question for Emma, we can come back to that later. But thank you, Emma. So we are now going to get, we've started recording again. So again, if you'd rather keep your camera off, that's no problem. We're going to hear from James, who is our programme lead in our social care team at CDC, and he's going to talk to you about a piece of work that they've been leading around supporting an autistic young person's journey, successful journey, out of children's services and into adult life, called Paving the Way. So James, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Anna. And yeah, definitely a very difficult task to try and follow Grace and Yasmina, but some really helpful insights and also I think some really good overlaps with what I'm going to be talking about today as well. So as Anna said, my name is James Shopkeeper. I'm a social care programme lead at the Council for Disabled Children. And I sort of have quite a varied job, but some of my work is around progression to adulthood. And I've got a background in social work with children and families. I'm here to talk today about Paving the Way, which is a new piece of practice guidance which we've written in partnership with Partners in Care and Health. And my colleague Macy is just going to pop a link to it in the chat so that you have that as well. I'm sure it will go out in any follow-up to this too. So just to give you a bit of an overview of the guide, our sort of focus was supporting practitioners in helping autistic young people to transition from children's social care and health services and into fulfilling adulthoods. And when we were creating the guide, we sort of particularly wanted to include children who do go on to receive support from adult social care and health services, as well as those who don't. And there's sort of a recognition there that existing guidance tends to focus on those who do go on to receive support from adult services. But actually those who don't go on to receive support are still likely to significantly benefit from holistic, well-planned support when they're progressing to adulthood. And a phrase that we sort of found ourselves repeating a lot when we were putting this guide together was that we were focusing on the journey of transition rather than the destination of it. And hopefully that sort of encapsulates what the guide is about. The image on the right sort of gives a bit of an overview of the guide and the different sections of it. But to make the most of the time today, I'm mainly going to be talking about the good practice principles. Quickly, in terms of thinking about the methodology for the guide, we started off with doing a rapid literature review on successful transitions for autistic young people and what those looked like. We then held a focus group with experts by experience, parent carers, and a range of different practitioners, which we used to sort of explore what we were finding in the literature review, to think about the gaps from what we had read, and to really draw out and contextualise what we were reading, and to understand that and ground that in people's lived experiences. And then throughout this process, we also worked with a young person, an autism advocate, as who sort of operated as a critical friend to us. So she came along to our focus group, she reviewed the guide, and she wrote a really brilliant foreword to it as well. And we had a launch event for the guide a week or two ago, which she came and spoke at, and again gave a really brilliant talk at that event too. And we really found that helpful in bringing both her sort of personal experience as well as her quite extensive professional knowledge and expertise to that role as well. So what we sort of focused on was thinking about what some of the barriers as well as what some of the principles to good practice are. And this slide gives you sort of a very basic overview of the 4 key barriers that we identified for our work. So these were social and communication challenges, lack of awareness and understanding in society, employment and education barriers, and health and mental health difficulties. And I don't have the time to go into all of these today, but I think you'll see there's quite a lot of overlaps between these and the good practice principles I'm going to speak to, which sort of serve as opportunities to overcome some of these barriers as well. And in the guide, so we found and we sort of set out 7 key good practice principles that were identified through the research that we did. And you'll see in the slides that follow, I've combined a couple of these together to save us a little bit of time, but you can find them in more detail in the guide. And as I'm sort of going through these next few slides, you'll see on the right-hand side, we've got 2 different colour boxes. We've got some purple boxes, which are key pieces of the law and statutory guidance that apply to each of the principles, and the pink boxes, which are sort of resources and support networks that are relevant to each of these principles. And again, lots more of that in the guide itself. But the first sort of key principle that we found was around the importance of early and continuous planning, which is person-centered and which involves children and young people in decision making. So what is really clear throughout the research as well as throughout our conversations is that planning for transitions needs to start early, and it needs to be tailored to the individual and be reviewed regularly. So that kind of person-centered planning is something which is outcome focused, it's based around young people's aspirations and goals, and they're adapted relative to unique strengths and areas of challenge for autistic young people. And so within that, recognizing that what works for one autistic young person, their family, may not work for another. And something that Louise, who is the young person that worked as a critical friend with us, talks a lot about, is that when we're supporting autistic young people, they deserve high aspirations, and support needs can exist alongside rather than instead of young people's ambitions and dreams, which I think is a really key message for us to take away. So we need to remember that a lot of the goals that autistic young people set for themselves are entirely realistic, and that even working towards goals that may not necessarily be achievable can still encourage and enable young people to develop knowledge and skills for adulthood. And I think something which Grace and Yasmin spoke to earlier as well is it's important that we recognise that autistic young people's aspiration to the future can be different to what non-autistic definition of success is, but that those aspirations are equally valid as well. So when we're working this way, we're also treating young people as equal partners in their process. You know, this is their transition, this is their lives and their experience. So we need to make sure that they have an informed understanding of the plan, and we need to empower them and support them to be involved in that plan. And as part of that, it's really important that we sort of consider options and offer access to independent advocacy, and that we explore alternative ways to engage young people as well. So things like the virtual world, assistive technology can all be really important. I think when I've spoken about this before, I often speak about a young man that I used to work with who found it very difficult to have one-to-one conversations with me, but could talk very well over the phone. And so sometimes I go around to see him, and we might sit in different rooms, but we'd speak on the phone instead. So it's really about thinking about the adaptations that we can make when we're working with young people. And when we're doing that, and we're working this way, what it helps to do is prepare young people and their families for change. It gives that space to process information, to ask questions, to give informed contributions. From a professional perspective, it can clarify roles and responsibilities, and that includes pathways post-18, and it reduces the risk of people falling through the gaps when we've had those conversations at a much earlier point in time and come to agreements around them. And it means that the plans that we make are based around and adapted to changing needs and aspirations for young people as well. But I think this point at the bottom about finding balance between preparing for adulthood and allowing young people to enjoy their childhood is really important, and something which came out a lot in the focus group that we ran, because sometimes it can suddenly feel like there's a very strong focus on independence and on preparing for adulthood, and that can sort of miss out some of these stages of childhood for young people and their families. But I think from our perspective, what we found and through the conversations we had is that when we start early, it can enable that to happen, because it means that the approach can be gradual and tailored rather than having to try to achieve a lot of change at once. Next principle we found, and it's quite closely related to this sort of idea of early person-centered planning, was around multi-agency collaboration and coordination. And what we mean by that is all relevant professionals being involved in planning from an early stage. And that should include any services that a young person is going on to access as an adult. So when we sort of talk about preparing for adulthood, we often sort of talk about this idea of a cliff edge at 18. But I think, that's something that implies that it's something that naturally occurs, that, a cliff is a natural formation. And I think something I want to challenge people to think about is that, that cliff edge is in fact something that we create through our policies, our processes, the way we work. To an extent, the law in this area as well definitely doesn't help. And taking steps like making sure our services are coordinated, they work together, helps to break down that cliff edge, because it means that young people experience much more joined up, seamless and holistic support. What's really clear in the literature is that involving GPs is critical. The reason for that is particularly because when young people don't move, GPs are one of very few services that don't change between childhood and adulthood. And even when they do move, it's still a universal services that everybody has access to. So it's really important that we make sure all of the relevant information is shared with the GP. And that's particularly important for children and young people who don't go on to access support from adult services as well. When we were sort of thinking about this multi-agency space, something else which came up a lot through our work was this idea of transitions passports, which are documents that can be co-produced with young people, families, professional networks, and can be shared with any services that a young person may go on to access. There's quite a lot of sort of variation in what they look like, but they tend to sort of include things like needs, preferences, aspirations for young people. It's used sort of different names. Sometimes they're health passports, sometimes they're communication passports, but broadly they have the same goal. And what we find is that it means that information about a child is accurate, it's up to date, it's been co-produced with them, but it also helps to reduce the need for stories to be repeated, whilst making sure that services have the information that they need. And when I was speaking to a particular parent about this and the importance of these kind of documents, she spoke about how difficult it was for her and her son to go and access a new service, and each time to have to retell their story to them. And from their perspective, that really had an impact on the relationship from an early point. That actually their sort of initial formation of the relationship was talking about very difficult things. And actually, if that information had travelled with them and had been shared in advance, then from her perspective, those initial interactions with the service could have focused on relationship building and getting to know each other, which is quite a different thing. Involving and supporting parent carers in this process is also really crucial, particularly when young people tell us that they want their parent carers to be involved in their planning and their decision making. So we want to make every effort in a similar way to children and young people to help them to contribute, to understand the process, to give informed contributions to it. And that's not only important from a rights perspective, it's also important because parent carers are experts in their children's lives. They're often the primary source of support and comfort to their child. And so they can offer really important contributions to our planning, to our thinking about what's going to help the transition process. And we know that as they transition into adulthood and they move on from that journey, that their parents are going to be an incredibly important figure in that process for them as well. So we really want to support and enable parent carers to be able to be part of that role and be part of this journey. And within that, we also need to recognise that parent carers are also experiencing this transition. It can also be an incredibly difficult period of time for them as well. And so we want to consider their support needs in relation to their child's transition too. And that can really vary. Some parents may benefit from some additional practical support, things like short breaks. Some parents may benefit from mental health support or help to access services that build their confidence in supporting their child post-transition. But I think that's something that we can sometimes lose a bit of sight of, is what the needs of the family are in relation to a child's transition. But it is integral to that transition that we consider it. There's a lot of talk in this space around sort of developing skills and providing experiences that support young people's needs and aspirations as well. And I think quite a lot of that, I know we're going to talk about the PFA outcome statements, quite a lot of it is incorporated into that. What's important is that before transition, and ideally well before transition, we're thinking about opportunities for young people to be able to practice and develop skills that are going to enable them to pursue their aspirations for their adulthood. And we need to recognise that's going to be different for different young people, because they're going to have different aspirations and different needs. So some young people might benefit from things like practical skills, managing money, cooking. But for others, it may be that they're going to benefit from developing and maintaining relationships, decision making. So we really want to get to know the young person that we're working with. One of the key things, which Emma spoke to earlier, was about connecting young people to careers advice, mentoring, work experience, vocational training, supported internships, accessible employers, education settings. It's important to remember, though, that when we're doing that, we need to try to tailor what we're offering to the young person's aspirations and needs, and not just offer it because it's available, which can sometimes be a trap that we fall into, which I recognise can be a challenge based on resources that are available locally. Meeting social and emotional needs pre and post transition is also really important as part of this, as part of the young person's needs overall. I think as many of us that are here today will be able to say that the process of transition can have an impact on young people's mental health, and that can be exacerbated by the risk of social isolation after moving on as well. So it's really important we sort of think about how we meet both sets of needs. And I think one thing that I'd be really clear about here is that even if a young person is clear with us that they don't want to access support pre-transition, and that they're not sure whether they want to access support post-transition either, that we still make sure that them and their families are signposted to services that could meet those needs in the future as well, in case they change their mind. What we also need to remember when we're sort of in this space of thinking about skills, thinking about experiences, thinking about growth, development, opportunities, is that it takes time and practice. So that speaks to, one, the importance of starting this process early, but it also speaks to the fact that there tends to be a lot of getting it wrong in this process, and that can involve some risk as well. But when we manage that in a safe and sensitive way, some of those risks and challenges can be real opportunities for learning. We learn a lot through getting things wrong in the same way that we learn through getting things right. And we don't want to deprive young people of experiences of getting things wrong, as long as we do that in a safe and supportive way. And gradually over time, as young people's skills develop, we want to think about how we scale back and reduce the level of adult support and supervision in these activities as well, again, relative to young person's needs. So the last good practice principle that I'm going to speak to is around the importance of keeping safe during transitions. So we know that transition can be a time of increased risk for children and young people, and that risk is particularly heightened for young people who are care experience, been involved in the youth justice system, or have experienced other forms of adversity and trauma. And actually, when we were creating this guide, one of the pieces of research that we looked at said that autistic young people and adults could be at greater risk in particular areas than their non-autistic peers. So an example of that was that 75.4% of autistic adults reported experiencing sexual harassment, compared to 56.4% of non-autistic adults, and 58.5% of autistic adults reported experiencing physical violence. That was compared with 36.4% of non-autistic adults. So it is a real time of increased risk, particularly as support services change and as the law around safeguarding changes when a young person reaches 18. And what we heard when we spoke to parent carers about this is that without suitable support, autistic young people can find themselves in unsafe situations. And an example that we had of that was involvement with gangs. And that was because some of those environments can provide a much clearer structure and expectations that isn't always offered by professional services. So I think if we sort of think about that through a trauma-informed lens, which is a question we want to put to ourselves, is what needs are being met through gangs, through people that exploit others, and how can we meet that in alternative ways? So in this case, that providing that structure, providing that clarity, what can we do to provide that ourselves? Effective safety planning can be one way of mitigating some of this risk, and what good safety planning looks like tends to involve a clear capture of what the risks are, how the young person or those around them might notice when those risks are emerging, and what will be done and by who when those risks emerge. And as much as we can when we think about safety plans, it's important that we bring in the different people around the young person to make sure it's meaningful, to make sure it's jointly agreed between the different people. And when we do that, that can sometimes help to reduce some of this anxiety, the understandable anxiety that professionals as well as parent carers and sometimes young people can experience when support is starting to reduce. I don't think I've quite got the time to talk to it all today, but it is really important to highlight as well the sort of box on the right-hand side about the changes to the law between the Children Act and the Care Act in relation to safeguarding. But I think one thing I do really want to highlight is the second paragraph there around preventative safeguarding duties in the Care Act as well, which I think we sometimes lose sight of a little bit. But actually, it's important to remember that local authorities have a requirement to prevent delay or reduce the development of needs for care and support. And so I just sort of challenge people to think about that, because I think sometimes we look at the threshold criteria in the Care Act as being we can't offer support below that, but actually that's a minimum expectation. The final slide is just sort of continuing this idea of keeping safe during transitions and what that looks like. So having an awareness and a management of risk is really important for transitions. We know that there's a greater time of vulnerability, there is heightened risk. But we also know that we can't completely eradicate risk. And that when we're trying to reduce risk, it shouldn't deprive young people of their autonomy and their ability to take risks where that's managed. So to give you an example of that, when we were in the focus groups and having a conversation about this, we heard about young people that were no longer able to access activities that they enjoyed because of risk associated with that. So the immediate thing, an event had happened, and the immediate response was that young person could no longer go to that activity. And actually what we know is that through doing that, there's much limited opportunity to practice skills for adulthood. There's much limited opportunity to practice this getting it wrong in a safe and supportive way. And in this particular example, it was a social activity. And so it was also a barrier to them being able to have their social and emotional needs met as well. And what we would advocate for in that example is a more nuanced and more proportionate approach to managing risk. So, for example, the young person could have been accompanied to the activity. There could have been a safety plan put in place around it, or there could be an agreement that they would call and check in with a trusted adult partway through the activity instead. And what that proportionate risk taking looks like does vary dependent on individual needs and circumstances. So again, we really need to get to know the young people that we're working with. One of the really sort of key things for us to think about in doing that is to sort of ask ourselves whether young people are able to tell us that they can, what they would do to keep themselves safe in a situation, but whether they can apply that in practice. They're quite different things. And where we think a young person may not be able to apply it, then it's important that we support them to practice doing that. We continue to monitor that in a safe way to enable them to be able to do it. But where young people aren't able to apply it despite that support, then we need to think about the sort of additional steps that we could take to promote their safety and their well-being. And I just wanted to sort of finish today with a quote from Louise from her foreword, which I'd really recommend people go and read. So Louise said that the professional who took time to ask who took the time to ask what I truly wanted in my life, listen to the answer and believe in me when it felt like the world was against me, changed my life in ways that I'll never be able to describe. We all have the power to make that difference for autistic young people. Thank you.
Thank you, James. We do have a couple of minutes to take some questions. There are a few in the chat, so let me go to those first. A couple on a similar theme around GPs, the mention of GPs being involved. I mean, a kind of critical part of the system that can make this better. There were lots of reactions to that. James, is there much in the report that helps us understand what good might look like in terms of involving GPs?
Yeah, I think so. The guide speaks to it slightly more. I think the important thing operationally in terms of frontline practice is trying to start those conversations early, because I know that it can be really challenging to be able to communicate with GPs, to hear back from them, but also on a strategic level, that we're having conversations with health about how we involve them and including GPs as part of this planning with a particular focus on children and young people who aren't going to go on to transition, because I think you sort of need both elements for this. And the other thing that speaks quite a lot to this is the nice guidance on transitions from children's services to adult services as well. So we'd recommend that people have a look at that too.
Absolutely. And Kath popped in the chat a reminder of the fact that GPs should do annual health checks for young people who are autistic or have learning disabilities. Obviously, that's predicated on diagnosis, which brings some other challenges, but there is guidance around what that should look like. So we'll make sure that we share the links to that. I guess big systemic challenge that we will want to keep engaging with RCGP, for instance. But what we will do is share the resources that exist, and that is part of the solution, chipping away, saying this is what good should look like, and all taking that responsibility to share. There were a couple of hands up, although they've gone. So I'm thinking maybe people put their questions in the chat. Also some reflections around you mentioning safe risk, and actually, you know, risk being something that young people will, whether we want to or not, expose themselves to, and how can we as professionals working with families understand what risk looks like in a proportionate and safe way. So lots of people chiming with people. And a bigger question for later, but one that came up related to what you said, James, around young people who aren't in education. How do we make sure that education isn't the only way into support at this point in life, and that kind of wider system response? Did those who aren't in education come up in the research that we did, James? Is there anything in the report that we can signpost people to?
Actually didn't come up in the report that we did. But I think that in terms of capturing those who aren't in education, I would say from broader work that we do, it's really important that we make sure that we have the right mechanisms in place to capture young people through other avenues as well. So things like making sure that the local offer and the preparing for adulthood parts of the local offer are very clear, that people understand it, and that all the different services that young people might go on to access, particularly when we're thinking about sort of 16 plus, but you know, really sort of 14 plus, are aware of the transition point, and are aware of where to go to access support, including through that local offer, is really important. So one of the really good things that we've heard about from other local authorities is work that they do in terms of outreach work, and sort of early intervention type work in relation to preparing for adulthood, where they talk to various different services sort of across education, health, social care, and the voluntary and community sector about what their offer is, and make sure that people understand how to access it as well. And in addition to that, they sort of operate drop-in hubs, community events, coffee mornings, and things like that, that young people and parents can go to access, as well as professionals. So it really helps to make sure that we do sort of make sure we have as wide a net as possible for children and young people.
Thanks, James. And I suppose the last thing, just spurred on by the GP comment, but also that point around family hubs or wider hubs. We at CDC, what we do a lot of is joining the dots up. So there are lots of big policy changes that have been announced that will come. One of those being around the sort of neighbourhood health focus. And we will be engaging with our central government colleagues on that, thinking about what that means for SEND across the age range. So lots of focus on early years, but also thinking about what it means for children and young people who are moving into adulthood. So we will keep up the conversation there, but please do share. And yes, Snap, Kath put something similar in the chat. So so yeah, any examples you have in your local area that you think that's working, please do share them, because it's those kind of nuggets of what works that helps us aggregate those ideas into something that we can take as a suggestion for wider change. Kath, did you want to come in on that?
Hi, yeah, just to draw people's attention to, I think it's called 42nd Street. It's a mental health charity in Manchester, and they did a piece of work with their young people with mental health issues, so not particularly SEND, but obviously we know there's a huge crossover. And basically what they were saying is everybody tells them to go somewhere, but then when they do go somewhere, they're not welcome. So I just added into the chat around welcome, really. So regardless what our spaces are, whether the GPs, neighbourhoods, family hubs, whatever we're expecting our young people to go in, if the minute they walk through the door they're giving some clear messages that isn't their space, they're gonna not want to share, etc. So I presume that's online with 42nd Street, and it was just, I've been able to use it loads in conversations with professionals around let's work on that welcome as people walk through the door, so that they feel it's a service that's for them.
Thanks, Kath. We'll look and we can share that. And I guess something to take us into our next presentation is inclusion shouldn't just happen in schools. It is across all settings, all parts of our lives. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Linda Jordan, who's going to talk us through, remind us of those lovely PFA outcomes. So welcome, Linda. Really nice to have you here.
Hi, Anna. Long time no see. Nice to see you.
We're really glad to see you.
Yes, I'm sure that many people on the call know a lot about preparing for adulthood. It has been a major theme in the Code of Practice and the legislation since 2014. But I also am sure that there are people here that are quite new to SEND and certainly to thinking about PFA. So, and it's never a problem to go over and have a reminder, is it either? So, as people are aware, sorry, I'm Linda Jordan. I work for the National Development Team for Inclusion, and I'm the lead for our work in London. I'm a member of a team. We have people working in each region. So preparing for adulthood, as everyone's aware, in the Code of Practice, Chapter 8 is called Preparing for Adulthood from the Earliest Years, and it's a very nice segue from those comments that people were making at the end of that previous conversation, because obviously planning from the earliest years it's like a statutory requirement, but it's really, really important. I'll say more about that, but it's we've called it what needs to change. So a lot has happened in 11 years, but we know that we're still there's still a lot to do to improve young people's support as they move from school onto post-16 and into adulthood. But it does need to start early. I'm sure that everybody is familiar with this graphic. It's been around now for a long time. And it's a summary of the work that we did before 2014 with a large number of young people around the country. We worked in 8 local authority areas on a programme that was called Getting a Life. And I see Julie Hicklins here from Manchester, and I'm sure there's other people here from local authorities that were part of the Getting a Life programme. And we worked for 3 years with young people in each of the areas that we worked in, as well as families and everyone that worked in the system. And for 3 years, we listened to those young people and we learned from their perspective about what needs to happen if they're going to be supported to go into employment, have independent lives, have friends, relationships and community, as you were just talking about, and to have good health. And the photographs along the side there are from a parallel programme that was called Aspirations for Life, when some of my colleagues worked across the country, again in a number of local authorities. and they were exploring what needs to happen in the early years to prepare young people for adulthood. And if we think about it, in our own lives, we know that what happened as young children and as we were going through childhood, that things that happen to us do have a major impact on the rest of our lives. And so the two programs kind of came together as preparing for adulthood in the legislation, and all through the Code of Practice there are many statutory requirements around what should happen for young people to support young people through their school life into adulthood. And I think what we feel we collected was the evidence of what works, because listening to young people for 3 years, as well as all of their parents and the people who worked in the systems, obviously gave a huge amount of information and evidence about what needs to change. And quite a lot of those things have happened. Every local authority area does have a preparing for adulthood strategy with actions, and we're seeing lots of really good stuff working across the country, but we still have a way to go. And I think one of the things I want to really stress is that preparing for adulthood is not only about post-16. Quite often we get asked to speak at events and people assume that we're going to just talk about post-16. But to reiterate what's in the Code of Practice, it must start early. It means that we must think about everything we do from the moment a child is identified with having additional needs, and making sure that we're not putting barriers in their way in terms of having really good lives. We have a phrase at NDTI, we call it gloriously ordinary lives, meaning, you know, we should allow our children with SEND to have the same opportunities, do the same stuff that everybody else does. And I've put a quote there from a piece of research. There's a lot of research about the importance of the early years. And we know that a lot of young people with learning disabilities and other learning difficulties, autism and so on, talk about loneliness, talk about social isolation, and talk about not having friends. And when we review education, health and care plans, I would say that 75% of plans talk about either being bullied, being lonely, not having friends, parents saying their aspiration is for their young person, their son or daughter, their young person to have friends, to be part of social groups. So we know that it is a major issue. And certainly when we were working with the young people across the country on the Getting a Life programme, it was their priority. They talked a lot about how they look at other young people and what they're doing, and they wish that they could do those things. In North Tyneside, we had a whole load of young people as sort of buddies from a local secondary school, and they were quite shocked at the limited lifestyles of the young people that we were working with. So, and we know that it really has to start in the early years. And this is just one quote from one of the many research pieces on early years, and it's that importance of peer play. We know that children learn, certainly I think it's probably throughout life, it's about human beings. We learn from each other, but certainly young children from very young ages will learn as much, if not more, from their peers as they do from the adults in their settings. Obviously they learn a lot from family, but when they get into nursery settings, early years settings, they are learning a lot from their peers. And so it's really important that we think about how we provide those young children with very high support needs with peer play, and with the opportunity to, in a way, you know, be supported by their peers to develop those early relationships. You know, initially children will play in parallel, they start to be interested in other children, and for many children by the age of 3, they can name their friends, and you know, by 5, it's an obsession, you know, they're best friends, they're falling out with friends. So in order to support that whole area of social inclusion, friends, relationships and community, that we really do think about those early years and how we support children to have that peer engagement. And the importance of thinking about PFA from the early years is that idea of having that continuity of values, aspirations and practice. I don't need to tell people on the call that our system is dominated by legislative frameworks that are that sort of lead to silo working, and we work really hard across those boundaries to make sure that we join up. But it is an area that we still need a lot. We need to do a lot, because families will still report regularly that they're getting different messages, that they feel that the environments in different parts of the system are different, the messages they get that are different, the aspirations that people express to them about their children are very different. So we do need to work towards that continuity of values and aspiration and practice 0 to 25, so that I saw the comment about talking about seamless practice as we go through, but we do need to make sure that everybody working in the system from 0 to 25 and beyond, across education, health and care and wider services, are on the same page and do have the same value base, and, you know, understand what that means in their day-to-day work. And then I put down there inclusive pedagogy. I think this is probably my passion. Since I was teaching, education has changed a lot, and I think we do need to really rethink inclusive pedagogy, because we know from some of the stuff James said, and I'm sure other people have said, that we need to make sure that all of our settings are welcoming to every child, and that the people working in those settings have the right support and the right training to be able to support all children. And I think inclusive pedagogy is something that is hopefully going to be more of a highlight in the work that we do after the white paper is published, which we're told is going to be in November, hopefully. And also today we've got the publication of the Education Select Committee white paper, which I haven't read yet. I'm sure some people on the call have read it. But because the government are really keen on improving inclusion in mainstream schools, let's hope that we'll be thinking more about inclusive pedagogy 0 to 25. So I think the main thing that we need to change in the system is listening to young people. And I know that I'm sure that Emma, when she talked about supported internships, would have talked about young people's involvement. And James certainly was talking about young people's voice. So NDTI, we always we work with young people. We've got a bunch of young people that are that work with us. They're our young peer support group. But what they tell us very much chimes with what the young people in the Getting a Life programme, which is now more than 10 years old, told us back then. And it is all about, this one is about independence, and independence doesn't mean doing things on your own. It's about being supported to be as independent as you can, but have the support you need. It's more about having a voice, having choice, having control in the things that we do have control in. And it is about, you know, young people having a voice from the earliest years and really thinking about supporting them to grow into confident young people in whatever way that works for them, and always stressing person-centeredness, that everybody's different and the support that people need is different. So the young people always talk about providing inspiration and role models. We don't always know what's possible. Have the right kind of support. Some young people need advocacy. Some young people need peer support. A lot need technology support, and so on and so forth. And young people, I think the comment in the chat about risk is really important. And person-centered planning is the best way of doing a risk assessment, because as we're talking to young people about their aspirations and parents about their aspirations, we're thinking about the support that needs to be put in place at the same time. And young people need to know about housing. NDTI are doing a lot on housing at the moment. And we know that in the Code of Practice, it says there's a statutory requirement to give information about housing from the Year 9 review and onwards, and we know that's not happening. So another thing we need to think more about. When we're thinking about friends, relationships and community, again, think about friends from when we are little, listen to us. Our young people with SEND represented on student forums, youth parliaments, and so on and so forth. And that point that young people make all the time, we want the same as other young children and young people. So find out what's important to us. Again, listen to us, find out what's important to us so we can be supported to do the things that we're really interested in. People who support us need to understand the importance of friendships. I've already spoken about that, and it is really important that the whole workforce understand how we can support peer relationships and social inclusion, as we call it. And let's make sure everything in the community is inclusive. So I think I heard somebody saying earlier, let's make sure every public service, and as far as we can influence private sector services as well, are inclusive. And let's have young people as mystery shoppers and feeding back in what it's like to go to the leisure centre or the library or the GP or whatever. And a big issue is keeping in touch with friends. So young people do make friends at school regularly. And what happens when they leave? Are they given the tools to keep in touch with their friends? And if a young person has got such high needs that they find that difficult without support, then obviously involving families in a conversation, maybe in the Year 11 review meeting or outside of the meeting, in how the young person is going to keep in touch with their friends. And then again on employment. So this is a major priority at the moment. As you know, the government is very keen that we prioritise employment, and we're running the internships work programme at the moment, and Emma would have spoken about supported internships and supported employment. But young people, this is just some highlights of what young people have said, but it's very important that young people get work experience when they're at school, as there is a requirement in the Gatsby benchmark, so that they begin to have a view on what sort of employment and what sort of stuff they might be doing when they leave education. They need good advice, careers advice and guidance. They need people to have high aspirations. People need to know what works and what can happen, etc. Think about jobs early. And then in terms of health, certainly when we were working on the Getting a Life programme, I know sex came up a lot. People are really passionate about having good sex and relationship education, going back to those healthy relationships and safe relationships. Young people with learning difficulties and other disabilities are very passionate about supporting their peers that don't use words to speak. So let's make sure we're planning with them. Young people should learn what to expect from doctors, etc. The work that we've done with our young people has resulted in a lot of really fantastic resources. So this is Ruth's top tips for brilliant meetings, which is on our website, and it's really amazing. It's a really good guide to how to run meetings, whether they're education, health and care planning meetings, whether they're annual reviews or child in need, whatever meetings. It's a really good guide. And also What Matters Ireland. So this is a person-centred tool which we've used a lot over the years with groups of young people or with individuals. And it's kind of to prepare them for their annual review meetings. It's to gather information for all sorts of reasons in terms of planning with individuals. So it's a summary of a person-centred plan, but it just gets those basic ideas about what's important to a young person, what needs to happen to support them to achieve the things that they're interested in and want to do, who's important in their lives, and how we're going to put together a really good plan. I'm not going to show this film, but you'll have it on when you get the slides. It's a film of young people talking about the importance of employment. And it's a group of young people that were part of our Time to Talk programme. And they were all young people who originally weren't able to come out of their bedrooms or to speak or to engage in planning. And it's a really nice video of them speaking about employment. And so I suppose in summary, you know, what's really, really important is that partnership working. The graphic there really puts that together. You know, if we're going to support young people to have good health, friends, be part of their communities, safe and purposeful relationships, jobs, and certainly things to do when they leave education, things to do during the day that are fulfilling and based on their aspirations, and those independent lives when they can have a voice and have choice and control. So, you know, as I said earlier, it is that having that local vision so that everybody working in the system from with young people 0 to 25 across education, healthcare, housing and employment are on the same page, and that they understand what it means for their day-to-day working. We need much more joined up thinking and services, clarity of purpose, young people as equal partners, and listen to young people and act on their ideas. And I think most of all, I think it's focusing on practice rather than process. We've been under a lot of pressure over the last 10 years to put in the processes and the bureaucracy of the SEND system. And I think that that focus now needs to be on frontline practice, so that when workers are having conversations with young people and their families, they are very confident about what is good practice, what is available, and having those conversations with young people. Lots of tools and resources on our website that help with writing good outcomes, top tips around employment, Ruth's top tips, how to have the right sort of activity at annual reviews, and so on and so forth. So they're all hyperlinked, so they can take you to our website and the resources.
Thank you so much, Linda, and we'll make sure that all of those links are shared.
Thank you.
A reminder that NDTI is one of our partners on the RISE programme,
Yes.
and actually we do lots of Linda and her colleagues can support in local areas with anything PFA related too, so do get in touch. Linda, do look at the chat when you get a chance. Lots of people, lots in there resonating, which always feels good. And some thanks for mentioning housing. If anyone has a question they want to ask, do pop your hand up. We have a few minutes. There was one question which I'll come to from Diana, which I just had. And yes, have you looked at how schools can be supported to be more integral to those early and ongoing support conversations? Often feels that they're very focused on exams. So how can schools be part of that wider holistic conversation about life?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the PFA pathways apply to everybody, not only services, but just to nurseries, to schools, to colleges. And yes, of course, we have looked at that. We do some work with schools, but there's another contract called Whole School Send, and their contract is to work with schools on the SEND agenda. However, we do work with schools as well alongside that, because we get requests to work with schools. And I've done a lot of attending SENCO forums over the last year. So we are working with schools, and we are working with Whole School Send as well. And they are now doing a lot more on preparing for adulthood as part of their programme.
Thanks.
But you're right. And I really hope that the select committee report today that has been published, that's in the chat, and the upcoming white paper are going to help us to much more focus on you know, the practice, I call it practice, you know, the pedagogy, the way that services work together, rather than worrying as much as we've had to on what I call the bureaucracy and the processes.
I think we have an interesting few months ahead of us, and I think we want to be thinking, like you say, about practice and models and replicable things that we can see work and that can be replicated in other areas, and that's part of what Works in Send does and shares, and what Linda and our other partners and colleagues do. So we absolutely will share the links. If they're not working on this slide, we'll make sure you get them in an email, but share with us and we'll share it through all of our networks, because that is how we help make change, isn't it? Someone's done something that worked well, let's share it and copy and replicate. We're not precious about things. It's not copying, it's flattery. If it works in one area, how do we make it work in another area? So that is what we will keep sharing.
Yeah, Anna, can I just come back on a couple of the other questions? So people are saying, so a couple of people have said the links are not working. So obviously
we'll make sure they go out.
I'll check they're right before they go out. And somebody's talking about young people who are very isolated socially, and how we can have those conversations. I mean, I suppose at NDTI, we always put those young people first. We always think about young people with the highest support needs first. And I would be happy, Diana, to speak to you separately, but we have got a lot of, I mean, the young people in the film that I described were all very socially isolated when we first met them. And we have got lots of different ways of planning with young people, regardless of their level of need. So I don't know if you want to put
Diana, you come in.
I was just going to say that it wasn't meant as a challenge. It's just, I'm the parent of two young people, 18 and 24, and listening to everything you said, it so resonated and made me feel quite sad that so much of that doesn't happen. So it's just my reflections of, and I'm just kind of curious, you know, to know how we make that change. I suppose that's the, and I know there's so much going on, but it almost feels that the system is stacked against those changes. So for example, you know, schools are judged on their results more than their, you know, how they support people into the next phase of education. And so that's what's mulling in my head. It's not a challenge to you, it's more, you know.
No, I agree with you. For me, it's the major problem in the system, Diana, because we've got whole, you know, I wouldn't like to put a number on it, but young people who are socially isolated and aren't part of peer groups, and aren't, you know, when they get older, and not having social lives. And when we talk about social lives, that's, you know, everybody's different, which is why person-centered planning is so important, because some young people, their aspiration is to have one friend. Do you know what I mean? But others want to do clubbing and, you know, a whole range of stuff. So and I suppose my answer is person-centered planning. You know, we need to make sure that in schools from early years through, everybody understands what we mean by person-centered planning. It's become a bit of a, I don't know, cliche, or, you know, something that, but we need to go back to it, because it really is about individual conversations, finding out what's important to that young person.
Thanks, Linda. And I think, Kath, you had your hand up, but possibly to say what Linda just said. Do you want to?
No, absolutely. I was just going to say, I think, you know, experience with a number of young people is when they start at 3, 4, 5, it makes that conversation regardless. And sometimes they're not socially isolated. They're doing it the way they want to do it, aren't they? But we're happier with that because we've had that voice all the way through, and they've had a chance to figure out what their voice means. And I don't mean voice just as verbal, obviously, but, you know, I just think there's some great examples of that. We just don't do it. So I think, like Linda said, we taught person-centered planning as a word, and nobody does it now, and they think what they're doing is person-centered, and you're like that, you know. So it's returning to some of those old-fashioned ideas in a way of what we should do genuinely work in some cases.
I think there's a really lovely comment in the chat from Luna, and Linda, something you said really resonated. Independence doesn't mean doing things on your own. So independence looks different for everyone. And James mentioned that he worked with a young person who he would speak to on the phone in the same building, different rooms. That was what worked best. So I think it is just about those adjustments that are best for them, isn't it? I don't want us to run over. We've got 5 minutes where we can take some reflections on everything that we've heard. But first of all, just a thank you to Emma, to Linda, to James, and to Yasmina and Grace, because all the presentations and things that we've heard, as we can see from the chat, have sparked lots of reflections, lots of thoughts, things that you might do differently. So lots of claps there, round of applause for everyone, and a resurgence in enthusiasm for person-centered planning. So let's not forget that is a very powerful tool. So yeah, chance to take any reflections. If you would like to put your hand up, do feel free. Pop something in the chat. Otherwise, there is also a link to an evaluation form. If you have to leave before the very end, do please tell us what worked for you, what didn't work for you in terms of this morning, what you'd like to hear more of, because we are lucky that we're able to do these sessions at the moment, and so we want to make sure they work for you. Would anyone like to reflect on anything you've heard? Mark, we used the word interdependence rather than independence, and I don't seem to hear this mentioned now.
Yeah.
Mark, do you want to come in on that? Oh, Linda, were you going to talk to that one?
No, I was just going to say that is so important. I mean, the independent living came from the disabled people's movement in the 90s, and it meant having choice and control over your life. So physically disabled people used to be, told where they were going to go, what they were going to do, where they were going to live. And they fought to get direct payments. And that was when direct payments first came in, that it was to support people to choose how they were supported. And that's where independent living came from. So it absolutely does not mean no human beings are independent.
There we go. And choice, there's another important word, Linda, that you'll leave us with that one. I think that's really important. We're going to rerun the polls that the first question around confidence and knowledge, and we're hoping that this has left you with something that you want to go and do a bit more thinking on, or take to a colleague. So just if you could complete that one as you did earlier, and then we'll do another word cloud before we let you go off to hopefully get some lunch. Before you have to leap onto another call. So how confident you feel in your role related to supporting moves into fulfilling adult life? Has your knowledge after this session boosted? Have you learned something? If we go on to the next question, or the word cloud, I think that might help us to feel some positivity as we move into a kind of uncertain time. What one action will you take to bring this learning that you've heard today into your practice? Early years conversations, listening, and time. I think that's, all have a lot of time, but we can't listen well if we don't have time to do it. So I think there's something about making sure we give the young people we work with time to tell us what they want us to hear. Sharing, person-centered planning, encouraging schools to embed this knowledge in practice. There are lots of links that you're going to get in an email. Share them with your schools colleagues. They are all resources that are free to use and incredibly useful. So it's about getting things out there. Really listening to young people. Recommending new resources to my team. Excellent. That's the sort of stuff that we hope you get from these sessions, and that you can take into your day-to-day. Keep adding to that. We'll see what you put in there. So it won't, although it might not be on the screen, it will still get to us. We do have a couple of slides to share, just a few more sessions that are coming up that you might want to sign up to. And yes, Louise, you will get a copy of the presentation. So these will come to you by email with all of the links. As I said back at the start, we're able to do these sessions and others through a contract that DFE fund us to do. So do tell us what you would like to see more of if this format worked for you. We've got some online training coming up, education other than at school, so a policy briefing on that. We have some sessions on data, voice and commissioning, which I know Kath, who's on the call, has supported us with really helpful practical sessions to think about how we hear children and young people's voices, how we use what we hear from children and young people to actually inform what we do and make a difference, which is the point, surely. The right support at the right time, so an introduction to early years SEND support and identification, understanding the social care offer in the context of inclusion, and navigating health and SEND. And that link on the screen will take you to sign up to that. Again, share, they might not be the session for you, but they will be for a colleague, so please do share. And some more, there are the links. Some are sold out, but there's a waiting list. And again, just a last plea to fill in that evaluation form, because we do want to make these work for you. So thank you again to our speakers, to our FLAIR members, to Galing who supported, and the CDC team who put this on, because all of the thanks for organising the chat go to my lovely RISE colleagues, so to Jo, to Hannah, to Macy, to Sam, and to Cara, who are all incredibly busy in the background putting things like this on for us. So thank you all. Bang on time, you may leave. Lovely to see you all.